Hello everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day. Today, we're diving into an incredible story of grit, determination, and the relentless pursuit of success. Together, we'll explore how one man turned pain into purpose and built $1 million business from scratch, facing betrayal, sabotage, and the shadows of his past along the way. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. In the quiet outskirts of a booming city, James sat alone at a worn-out wooden table. His glasses fogged slightly, not from the weather but from the fire of determination burning behind them. The air was still, yet heavy with the weight of memories he couldn't shake. The day Diep vanished, the helplessness that gnawed at him, and the constant dread of John's lingering presence. But rather than letting it paralyze him, James allowed that pain to become his fuel. He had no great inheritance, no wealthy allies, just a modest amount left behind by his late father and a deep hunger to build something meaningful, something that would outlast his grief. And so began his mission to earn $1 million. Not through luck, but through sheer force of will. James founded J&D Enterprises from the most humble beginnings, a cramped garage that smelled of oil and dust. With just $10,000 from his father's savings, he bought a second-hand delivery truck that coughed like an old man and had barely enough left for business cards and fuel. But James wasn't aiming for flashy. He was aiming for survival and growth. He had a few names in the timber industry, folks he'd met through his father, and that's where he started. Small lumber runs from remote villages into the city, a niche too minor for big logistics players but perfect for a scrappy underdog. Every morning, he loaded the truck himself, drove for hours, negotiated with skeptical suppliers, then unloaded under the brutal sun. All while keeping an eye out for John's men, old enemies who hadn't forgotten the past and weren't done with him yet. At night, with his body aching, James pored over spreadsheets and route maps, always planning the next move. Sleep was scarce, and rest even scarcer. But slowly, the wheels began to turn. One stormy week changed everything. A key timber supplier lost their warehouse to a flood and was left scrambling to fill contracts. James showed up with supplies, offered help without profit, and earned their lasting gratitude and their business. That gesture paid off, opening the door to regular, high-paying contracts. J&D Enterprises began to grow. Slowly at first, then steadily. James hired 2 drivers, rented a real warehouse, and started building a name for himself. But with success came whispers. Rivals in the industry began spreading rumors. James was tied to John's criminal past, that his company was a front, that he wasn't to be trusted. Instead of fighting back with fists, James chose transparency. He opened his books, invited inspections, even gave his employees profit shares to build loyalty and silence doubt. It worked. His business grew more legitimate in the public eye, and clients stayed loyal. But James wasn't just chasing money. Every spare dollar went into searching for Diep, private investigators, tips, leads that led nowhere. The more he earned, the more he poured into the black hole of her disappearance. Then came the alley ambush. A tip had come in, a supposed sighting of Diep. James followed it to a shadowy part of town. It was a trap. John's men were waiting. Bullets ripped through the air, his truck's windows shattered, and James barely escaped with his life. Bloodied, furious, and shaken, he limped back to his office that night with a new vow: survive, grow, and never stop fighting. Months turned into years. J&D Enterprises expanded beyond timber. James secured a government contract for transporting emergency supplies to flood zones, an opportunity that doubled his fleet to 10 trucks. GPS tracking systems were added to improve efficiency, slashing costs and boosting profits. Investors started taking notice. With every strategic win, his account balance inched higher: $200,000, then $400,000. At $500,000, he could see the $1 million mark on the horizon, but that's when everything nearly collapsed. A competitor sabotaged one of his largest shipments. The cargo never arrived. Clients were furious. The company hemorrhaged $200,000 in damages and lost contracts. James was gutted, but not broken. He launched an internal investigation and found the leak. One of his own employees had been bribed to sabotage the delivery. James fired him on the spot, doubled down on security, and returned to the field himself to stabilize operations. Then came his riskiest move yet. An international buyer, a massive player in the construction industry, was looking for a logistics partner for a time-sensitive timber shipment. The deal was big, huge, and dangerous. If it failed, James would lose almost everything. If it worked, it could catapult him within inches of the $1 million. He bet it all. Negotiations were tense, but James managed to secure the deal. Every truck he owned was put to use. Every driver briefed with military precision. And when the dust settled, the shipment was delivered on time. The profit, $300,000. His total net worth soared to $900,000. He stood in the center of his warehouse that night, sweat-soaked and dirt-streaked, looking around at the empire he'd built from scraps. But he wasn't celebrating yet. The final stretch, the last $100,000, was the hardest. Not just financially, but emotionally. His body was tired, his heart weighed down with loss, and somewhere out there, Diep was still missing. But James wasn't the type to stop just before the finish line. Not now. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of J&D Enterprises' newest warehouse, casting long golden rays across crates of timber, coils of steel, and rows of humming trucks. James stood at his desk, surrounded by open binders, coffee-stained blueprints, and notes scrawled in his hurried handwriting. His fingers traced the lines of a new logistics hub layout, but his mind wasn't on the design. Not fully. His eyes flicked up toward a photograph on the wall. Diep, smiling, forever frozen in time. That smile had driven him through the worst storms, both literal and emotional. He was sitting on a fortune now, $900,000 in assets, contracts, and investments. And yet, that final stretch to $1 million felt like a mountain taller than any he'd climbed. John, now imprisoned after a lengthy investigation, was no longer a direct threat, but his influence lingered like smoke in a closed room. Some enemies never fully disappeared. That's when the email came. A multinational logistics conglomerate, Atlas Global, had been watching J&D's growth and wanted to discuss a potential merger. The offer? A $700,000 upfront buyout, full acquisition, and the promise of a comfortable, semi-retired role for James as a regional director. The proposal would immediately push James past the $1 million mark and offer peace of mind. No more long nights, no more fear, but also no more control. James stared at the screen, unmoving, for several long minutes. Then he closed the laptop. Selling wasn't the dream, building was. The next day, James replied with a counteroffer, a strategic partnership. He proposed that J&D would remain independent but partner with Atlas on cross-border shipments. In exchange, Atlas would invest $400,000 into J&D for expanded infrastructure and grant James a share of the profits for joint ventures. The terms were ambitious, bold even, and James knew the road ahead would be brutal. Negotiations began. James flew out to Singapore, then Seoul, then back home for back-to-back video calls with stone-faced executives who questioned every number, every claim. His voice wore thin from arguing logistics efficiency metrics, and his patience frayed under the weight of demands. Atlas wanted guarantees, flawless performance, proof that J&D wasn't just a fluke. Eventually, they agreed on one condition. James would lead a complex delivery operation through 3 countries in 10 days, transporting fragile components for a government-backed green energy project. It was the ultimate test. If he pulled it off, the deal would go through, and the investment would hit his account. If he failed, everything could collapse. James accepted. The plan was simple on paper, but treacherous in execution. Routes had to be optimized to the minute, drivers coordinated like clockwork, and customs paperwork completed with 0 errors. He stayed up for 3 straight nights planning contingencies for everything from breakdowns to border delays. But as with everything in James's life, chaos found its way in. On day 2, a delay at a border crossing between Laos and Vietnam halted the lead truck for over 6 hours. James called in favors, pulled strings, and arranged a local liaison to expedite the process. Day 4. A mechanical failure and Truck 5 stranded half the cargo on a rural road. James personally drove a backup vehicle from the city, oversaw the transfer of goods, and got the convoy moving again. The weather turned ugly. Rain pelted the trucks as they snaked through narrow mountain passes. Exhaustion set in, drivers grew irritable, and James, running on coffee and pure willpower, barely slept more than an hour each night. On the 9th day, just when success was within reach, sabotage struck. Truck 3 broke down. The mechanics found the engine had been tampered with. Likely a last gasp of revenge from someone tied to John's crumbling network. James didn't panic. He couldn't. With time slipping through his fingers, he jumped into the driver's seat of a backup vehicle, took the wheel himself, and roared onto the rain-slicked roads. His hands gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline. His glasses fogged with sweat. Every turn felt like fate holding its breath. But he made it. With just 3 hours left on the clock, James rolled into the delivery site. The cargo was intact. Every checkpoint had been cleared. Every signature was in place. The officials signed off, and just like that, he had done it. The next morning, the deal with Atlas was finalized. The $400,000 hit his account. Combined with his existing wealth, it pushed his net worth to $1.3 million. James didn't celebrate with champagne or a lavish party. Instead, he stood in the heart of his warehouse, surrounded by forklifts, stacks of shipping manifests, and the hum of operations that never truly stopped. A few of his longtime team members, people who had been with him since the early garage days, gathered around. Someone brought out a bottle of cheap whiskey. There were laughs, cheers, and for the first time in a long time, tears. James raised his glass. "To the ones we've lost," he said quietly, "and to the ones we're still searching for." The $1 million wasn't just a financial goal, it was proof. Proof that pain didn't have to end in ruin, that the past, no matter how dark, didn't have to define the future. James had turned grief into grit, enemies into motivation, and setbacks into fuel. In the months that followed, J&D Enterprises expanded into Southeast Asia, launching satellite offices in Cambodia and Thailand. His story began appearing in business blogs and entrepreneurial podcasts. People admired the rags to riches angle, but they didn't know the full weight behind every dollar he'd earned. One night, long after the office had emptied, James sat alone again at that same rickety wooden table he'd started at. This time, it had been moved to his private office, framed like a relic of the past. He opened a thick envelope, another update from a private investigator he'd quietly kept on retainer. Still no sign of Diep. But he wasn't broken by the news. Not anymore. He had built more than a company. He had built a legacy, a resilient, unshakable monument to survival. His journey had started with heartbreak, but it had grown into something unstoppable. And somewhere in the silence of the night, James allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The money, that was just a number, but what it represented, that was everything. This is the gripping journey of James, a man haunted by loss and danger, who transforms his pain into purpose. Starting with just $10,000 in a second-hand truck, James builds J&D Enterprises from the ground up, navigating the ruthless logistics world while being hunted by his past. From surviving ambushes to outsmarting rivals and risking everything on a single shipment, his path is filled with tension and sacrifice. Every dollar earned brings him closer to his goal and to the hope of finding Diep, the person he couldn't save. Refusing to sell out, James takes on a high-stakes international deal that pushes him past the $1 million mark. More than a story about money, this is a powerful tale of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable spirit of a man who refused to give up.